Every summer, front offices around the league stand up in front of cameras and tell you the same lie. They say their center depth is fine. They say they are built down the middle. And every single year, a handful of those teams get exposed the moment the games start counting. Insiders around the league have started sounding the alarm on exactly which teams are faking it this time, and fans who have watched these franchises long enough are fed up with pretending otherwise. So let's rip the curtain back on 3 teams walking into next season with a center problem they are desperately hoping nobody notices. Start in Chicago because this one is impossible to spin. Connor Bedard is the engine of the entire Blackhawks rebuild. 20 years old, the first overall pick, a player who scored 75 points in just 69 games last season, despite already dealing with a shoulder issue in December that cost him time. Chicago built their entire future around the idea that Bedard is a true #1 center, a franchise cornerstone they could plan a decade around. Then came July. Bedard was skating in an offseason training session in Vancouver, working out with a group of NHL players, trying to stay sharp before camp. He lost an edge, crashed hard into the boards, and skated off, holding his left shoulder in visible pain. Video of the moment spread instantly, and you could actually hear him in distress as he left the ice. Days later, the team confirmed the worst version of the news: surgery, a recovery timeline of approximately 4 months. That puts his return somewhere in early to mid-November, meaning the Blackhawks open the entire season, the first month or more of hockey, without their only legitimate #1 center on the roster. Think about what that actually means for a rebuilding team. This isn't a contender absorbing an injury to a complementary piece. This is a rebuild losing its only true center for the exact stretch when a young team needs to build habits, chemistry, and confidence. Chicago is currently without a captain after trading Nick Foligno away, so there isn't even a clear locker room leader to steady the group while their best player recovers. Behind Bedard, the depth chart reads like a list of promising names still trying to prove they belong. Frank Nazar, Anton Frondel, Oliver Moore, Ryan Green, talented, yes. Ready to be an NHL #1 center on a nightly basis, not even close. This marks the 3rd significant injury of Bedard's young career, following a fractured jaw as a rookie and a separate shoulder injury just last December. Twice now it's been the shoulders, and it's fair to start asking an uncomfortable question. Is Chicago's supposed franchise center actually as durable as everyone assumed, or is this becoming a pattern the front office is choosing not to talk about out loud? There's also the contract situation sitting quietly underneath all of this, and it makes the timing even worse. Bedard is a restricted free agent, and general manager Kyle Davidson has been saying for weeks that there is nothing new to report on those negotiations. Now factor in the record-breaking offer sheet that Anaheim center Leo Carlsson just signed with Philadelphia, a deal worth $18 million a year, the richest annual value for any player in the league. That number resets the entire market for young franchise centers, and it lands right in the middle of Chicago trying to figure out what to pay their own injured, unsigned centerpiece. A rebuilding team now has to negotiate a record-setting extension for a player who just had shoulder surgery and won't be on the ice to prove anything for months. That is not a position of strength. That is a front office hoping nobody notices how complicated this actually is. Chicago fans have every right to be furious watching their rebuild get pushed back yet again through no fault of their own. Now let's go to Winnipeg, because this is a story that has been quietly rotting for years, and everyone in that fan base already knows it. Mark Scheifele is genuinely one of the best centers in hockey. A franchise record holder, a consistent point-per-game producer, a player who just posted over 100 points last season. On paper, Winnipeg looks like a team with a true #1 center, but here's the problem nobody wants to say directly. Scheifele has been a #1 center without a real #2 behind him for years, and the Jets have tried everything to fix it and failed every single time. They traded for Pierre-Luc Dubois, hoping he would be the long-term answer as a legitimate second center. That fell apart. They tried developing Cole Perfetti into the role. Didn't stick, and he's more of a winger long-term anyway. They even brought Winnipeg native Jonathan Toews out of retirement, hoping some remaining magic could paper over the hole. The results were underwhelming. Currently, the options behind Scheifele are names like Vladislav Namestnikov and Adam Lowry. Capable depth players who have zero business being a second-line center on a team that actually wants to win a Stanley Cup. That gap has been described inside hockey circles as a long-standing issue down the middle for Winnipeg, one the front office keeps patching instead of solving. and now it might be about to get dramatically worse. Connor Hellebuyck, the Jets' franchise goaltender, is deep in trade rumors after publicly calling last season unacceptable and missing the playoffs entirely. If Winnipeg actually moves Hellebuyck, that isn't just a goaltending decision. League insiders have pointed out that a Hellebuyck trade would signal something much bigger, a full organizational reset. And if that reset happens, Scheifele himself becomes a realistic trade candidate, with teams like Edmonton, Toronto, and Montreal already being floated as potential landing spots. So sit with that for a second. Winnipeg's center depth chart currently has exactly one legitimate center, and there is a real scenario on the table where that same team trades him away within the same rebuild. A team that has spent years failing to find a number 2 center could wake up next season with no true number 1 center at all. That's not depth. That's a house of cards, and Jets fans watching this unfold for years are done pretending the plan is working. If stories like this are the kind of stuff you actually want to know before the season starts, instead of finding out the hard way in October, go ahead and subscribe, because we're breaking down exactly which teams are quietly exposed like this all summer long. And it isn't like Winnipeg hasn't tried to address it through the draft either. Their most recent first-round pick, forward Vigo Bjork, was actually the second center taken in this year's entire draft class, and there's already buzz that he could jump straight to the NHL as soon as this September. That tells you two things at once. The organization clearly knows this hole exists and is trying to solve it with young talent. But it also tells you they're essentially betting the fix on an 18-year-old rookie playing professional hockey against grown men for the first time, rather than trusting anyone currently on the roster to handle the job. When your best solution to a multi-year problem is a teenager who hasn't played a single NHL game, that isn't organizational depth. That's organizational hope. Now to Detroit, where the center situation is tangled up in something even messier than a depth chart problem. The Red Wings just went through a stunning front office shakeup. Steve Yzerman, the man who ran their hockey operations since 2019, was abruptly removed as general manager in the middle of July and moved into a vague senior advisor role. That kind of sudden unplanned change during the middle of the offseason almost never happens without a serious underlying issue, and in Detroit's case, it landed right in the middle of an already tense situation with Captain Dylan Larkin, who requested a trade just weeks earlier, reportedly due to friction with Yzerman himself. Here's why that matters for the center conversation specifically. Larkin has spent his career as arguably Detroit's most important forward, but the franchise has never fully settled the question of who its true number 1 center actually is long-term, especially with Larkin's own future now uncertain. Whoever takes over as the new head of hockey operations inherits not just a fractured relationship with their captain, but a center depth chart with a giant question mark sitting right at the top of it. You cannot build a real identity down the middle when the front office itself just got blown up, and the best center on the roster might not even be there by opening night. And remember, this wasn't a routine offseason transition. Detroit is currently sitting on the longest active playoff drought in the entire league, a stretch that has now reached 10 consecutive seasons without a postseason appearance. Ownership didn't remove Yzerman in April or May, when franchises typically handle these decisions calmly. They did it in the middle of July, after the draft had already passed and free agency had already opened, which tells you this wasn't part of some carefully planned transition. Something forced the timeline, and most signs point directly back to the Larkin situation boiling over behind the scenes. A new hockey operations leader now has to walk into that building and immediately decide whether to build the center position around Larkin, around someone else entirely, or around whatever comes back if Larkin actually gets traded before next season even begins. 3 teams, 3 completely different reasons. Chicago is without its only real number 1 center for the start of the season due to injury. Winnipeg has one legitimate center and a real chance of losing him in a rebuild after years of failing to find anyone behind him. Detroit doesn't even know who's making the decisions about its center of the future, let alone who that center actually is. This is exactly the pattern hockey insiders have been quietly flagging all summer. Teams talking a big game about their center depth in press conferences, while the actual roster tells a very different story. Fans who follow these franchises closely aren't fooled anymore, and honestly, why should they be? The tape doesn't lie, even when the front office does. So, here's the real question heading into training camp. Which of these three teams actually fixes their center problem before the games start mattering, and which one is still standing in front of reporters in October insisting everything is fine while everyone watching already knows exactly how fake that confidence really is?